to our sixth evidence session of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Artificial Intelligence. We had a very interesting, for those of you who weren't here before, very interesting advisory board meeting where we discussed and decided on our future programme, which I'm sure will be shared with you in due course. As I have to leave at about 6 o'clock, I'm going to pass over to my co-chairman, which is why we have co-chairman, so we allow for these eventualities, to Lord Clement-Jones, who is going to chair the evidence session. But I'll be with you for the first half an hour so I can hear our range of speakers.
Great. Thanks very much, Stephen. Rather dauntingly, it says chair welcome 10 minutes. Now, you know, this is
see what I did there.
Possibly this is sort of a Castro-like type welcome that is expected. I don't know. All I can say is that it's very clear what the exam question is, or the exam questions are today from our panel of speakers. We have four panellists, which is terrific. How has AI changed trade internationally and within national borders? How can industries shift their business models to adapt to AI? How do we shift from e-commerce to AI commerce? And what changes have to be made to UK taxing frameworks? Now, I'm sure that there are many other questions with the general trade umbrella, within the general trade umbrella, which they will be answering, but those seem to be the questions that they've probably been asked to grapple with, at least for the next hour and a half or so. So I'm going to just take them in order in which they're down on our programme, and I'm going to ask Mike Short, who's the Chief Scientific Advisor to the Department of International Trade, to speak first. And as the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department for International Trade, Dr. Short is responsible for ensuring the Department's policies are supported by the best science, engineering and technical advice. Well, I must say he's probably been in great demand recently, what with all sorts of border issues and the like, seamless, frictionless trade and so on and so forth. So, Mike, over to you.
Well, may I first of all thank you for the invitation to be here. It's a great pleasure. Having had 40 years in electronics and telecommunications and joining the government at the beginning of this year, it's been quite a change, but I think it's been a fascinating change joining the Department for International Trade. But may I also respond with a brief bouquet of thanks to APPG as well for the work you're doing, because actually without the openness of the discussion, trade would be so much harder. And I think one of the key themes I'm going to stress today is how we need to keep the dialogue going to facilitate trade in a variety of areas. Let me give a few examples. So first of all, I think PwC recently in their report forecast that artificial intelligence could generate something like $15.7 trillion by 2030 in their recent report. Clearly that covers a range of sectors, and trade has to depend on the sector knowledge in each of those areas. But that's a big figure in itself. Some of the areas that we see therefore helping trade are not just to do with export or inward investment, but also collaboration in this area. And if we take a few examples in particular, e-commerce and fintech is already using artificial intelligence in a variety of ways. So when we think of the City of London, when we think of our transactions online, we need the suggestions approach that may come with commodity trading, financial trading or e-commerce. And as that grows, we need to support that appropriately. It may be seen as a business-to-business market rather than a business-to-consumer market in the main, but it will grow from being business-to-business to business-to-consumer. Secondly, some of the areas to do with automated and driverless cars, where I've had some involvement personally. Clearly, there's a lot of intention around not just the connectivity to the car, but making sure the data facilitates safe driving and, in fact, driverless driving in an appropriate manner. And artificial intelligence is one of the key technologies to support that, whether it be to improve driver safety or to improve the congestion on our roads. Smart cities won't work very well without artificial intelligence. We need that connectivity and access to data to make our cities more efficient and future-proof. We also can see in areas like health, things like how can we predict diseases before they affect people? How can we actually access the data, where the UK has a very significant data set to do with the history of the NHS, but how can we use that data and then apply artificial intelligence to it? This will mean thinking about electronic health records. How do we actually make sure that they're available appropriately, anonymised and aggregated to predict change and to minimise the risk of epidemics? One of the things I did about 3 weeks ago was to look at the US MedTech conference called AdvaMed to see if we can start to look at can patient record systems from the USA be similar to the patient record system in the UK, such that we could collaborate when it came to examining patient record systems. The bigger the data sets internationally, the better the results, but it needs appropriate mechanisms to share data across boundaries. And lastly, telecoms, which is my background. Telecoms has been using artificial intelligence in a variety of ways to support customer pricing plans and suggestions for your next mobile phone, should you wish. So analysing data to make suggestions to customers at point of sale, but even to look at how to do better network and engineering planning within big telecoms networks. This starts to raise questions about how do the regulators regulate the big utilities, telecoms, energy, water, or even the road and rail. How do they start to report on access to innovation and access to data? And the recent report by NIC, Data for Public Good, is a very good signpost for that. I would think that the role of the regulators should be to include reading that and acting on it as part of an AI strategy. From a trade point of view, we clearly support overseas missions, events. Some of these are sector-specific, but amongst others, we're supporting the big Consumer Electronics Show in January in Las Vegas or Mobile World Congress in February. AI will be amongst the big themes that are covered, whether it be on the stands or in the private seminars or on the big stage. We need to consider that very carefully. London Tech Week has certainly had good activities in that area with DIT support, as indeed has CogX, a major event specialising in this area. Very pleased that trade, we judged a range of design competitions for the World Trade Expo in 2020, of which Steve and I were both jury members, and we announced some 3 weeks ago the winner, which will display interesting AI-based solutions in a World Expo setting. And I think it just shows some leadership in this space from the UK. I think as a big exhibition that lasts for 6 months, it will be very good to show how open we are to that interactivity of information, whether it be through artificial intelligence or space and satellite systems. We couldn't have got this far if the UK hadn't supported strong universities and even centres of excellence, and I would applaud some of the work by Dame Wendy Hall and colleagues on the recent AI report. Certainly we've had lots of inbound delegations to talk to us about that, and I think that is likely to continue. I'd also add that the university support in research in this area has been very powerful, very useful. Even this morning I had a discussion with an Austrian delegation around the future of drones and AI and how could the two work together better. So AI should not be in a standalone mode when it's researched. It should be looked at from an implementation point of view as much D as it is R in the R&D. And lastly, I think one of the key areas for growth which needs to be considered, I think, is access to data. And whilst we need to respect people's privacy and stay within the law, I think access to data is the key ingredient to making AI a success. If we don't have access to data both nationally and internationally, I think some of the trade will be inhibited. We are here as the Department of International Trade not just for frictionless trading, but also to support areas of growth. And these should be strong areas of UK growth, whether linked to a particular sector or a theme such as cybersecurity, but certainly must be linked to very strong and open big data sets. Thank you.
Well, that was a fantastic sort of tapestry, Mike, of the sheer number of areas that you cover. How on earth do you begin to prioritise? I mean, obviously you have a very big wingspan here, and a lot of it is about supporting like UK AI, the UK AI sector in a variety of different ways. But I mean, in terms of overarching strategy, do you work with the Government Office for AI, for instance, in terms of trying to set a governmental, a cross-governmental set of priorities, or are you at the moment really very focused on an individual departmental set of priorities?
Clearly, export is for the UK as a whole. The Office of AI is too new for us to have fully engaged, but I know Tabitha Goldfarb pretty well from the CogX activity and other things we've done with trade. With regard to making more of Office of AI, that's our intention this autumn. With regard to other sectors, clearly if it was, say, agri-tech with AI, we would involve DEFRA If it were automotive or perhaps aerospace, BAYS would be involved. It's a cross-departmental activity whenever there is an export-oriented mission. Some of the things that we do with some of the devolved nations also require some very clear enthusiasm to be identified. And I think what we're beginning to do in advance of the Office of AI being fully formed is to identify experts that we can work with. So if we think about the industrial strategy from BAYS, that singled out AI as a very important area for research and development, and we've matched a specialist in DIT, Dr. Chris Moore, to work with that specialist in BAYS on that AI challenge. And we'll make more linkages as some of the leading case studies emerge, which are ready for export or ready for collaboration.
To follow up, I mean, what sort of role do you think government procurement particularly has in all of this?
That's a great question. So if I take the industrial strategy again, that points to a challenge rising to 2.4% of GDP by 2027. I think government procurement is notably silent within that 2.4%, and we need to think about government procurement as an enabler to get better match funding and joint R&D. I think in the AI case, I think the fact that AI is listed in the industrial strategy really helps, and I think that's why I've said we've got match people on it ready to support that co-funding.
Great, thank you very much.
Just a point of clarification, when you talk about the 2.4%, that's the 2.4% of GDP collectively spent on research and development, is that
correct? By 2027, which is not just public money, but public and private money combined. And it's an ambition that we're not very close to at the moment, but if we want to look at all areas of R&D, within that 2.4%, a lot more work needs to be done collaboratively.
Great, Mike, thanks very much indeed. And for those who've come in, and I'm so sorry about the security arrangements here, it's obviously taking an age to get through security. We're only a short way through the meeting. We've had Mike Short, our first speaker. We've got 3 more to go. And I'm going to ask Matthew Howard, who's the Director of Artificial Intelligence and Cognitive Analytics at Deloitte, to speak next. He leads the AI projects at Deloitte, spanning strategy, proof of concept, pilot implementation and integration. He works with a broad range of data science technologies, including Google, Amazon and IBM Watson, and focuses on internal transformation as well as client services. Matthew.
Thank you. So, hello everybody. Thank you again for the invitation to speak. Clearly, AI has a significant role to play in transforming how UK businesses operate and trade, both nationally and internationally. From powering autonomous vehicles to reviewing legal contracts, improving translation accuracy, optimising negotiation and growth strategies, AI is impacting every aspect of traditional commerce models. However, AI is not reaching its potential in delivering the productivity gains British businesses urgently need. While AI and advanced technology is pervasive in consumers' everyday lives, from smartphones to computer games, it is nowhere near as widely used in businesses' day-to-day operations and really how they conduct trade and conduct their business models. At Deloitte, much of our AI work concentrates on helping organisations make the best use of their data and their resources, whether this be through automating low-value tasks, delivering intelligent insights, or enabling higher quality engagement with customers. The focus is really to improve operational efficiency and help make them more competitive in the immediate and long-term future. In other words, and to be really honest, we often focus on automating the most boring stuff to free up valuable time and improve productivity so your valuable resources can do the really complicated things. The truth is, the best AI use cases are often some of the most boring things. And as we operate very much at the commercial sharp end, those are the things we get asked to do. To give you an example, one of our most recent projects was to automate customer contact handling using AI-powered natural language processing, deep learning, and robotic process automation. This was for a very major UK retailer. They get about 500,000 email queries a year, with a significant time being spent in the front office reading emails only to reassign them and send them to back office teams. In other words, an email comes in, it sits in an inbox, and it waits for someone else to read it, to send it to someone else, to do something else with it. So, to make this process more efficient, we developed an automation solution to identify the category of customer email and whether or not they could just be sent directly to a specialist back office team or they could be dealt with the front office. This freed up staff from the repetitive process of reading and reassigning, stroke forwarding, emails to specialist teams, but it also boosted the response time. It makes it a better experience for your customers. The techniques we use to do this are very, very cross-sector, which is a very important point about an awful lot of these technologies. We've taken the same set of technologies, the same process of categorization, and used it in the context of National Health Service, where we're looking at using the same approach in referral triage. Now, it's pilot work, it's early days, but it's already got some very interesting and promising results. And it shows actually how elastic some of these technologies are and how they can really be applied in a lot of places. Overall, we welcome the AI sector deal and the creation of the AI Council, especially the ambition to boost national R&D spend, improve critical infrastructure, open up more public interoperable data, and foster new talent in the field. As has been discussed in previous APPG sessions, having a long-term strategic plan will be crucial to our success. However, in terms of the here and now, we think there's a pressing need to address three key issues. The first is really to bridge the technical and commercial knowledge gap that exists around this space. According to our own research, less than half of executives believe their organisation's leadership has a clear understanding of AI. At the same time, only 12% of leaders believe UK school leavers and graduates have the necessary digital skills. Bridging this gap will require much more proactive coordination between academia, business and government. Canada, as an example, is a leader in the space, with universities running robust business incubation programs and launching flexible AI management courses targeting business executives. A large part of the success here will be removing the barriers to work in AI, or perceived barriers to work in AI, and really making the field much more inclusive. For example, there is still a perception that you need a PhD in the space to do anything in artificial intelligence. You don't. Clearly, we need great academics, but at the same time, what we also need are strong business-focused data scientists working at the commercial sharp end of what we might call business artificial intelligence. Secondly, we need greater prioritisation of scalable pan-industry solutions for investment. Matched funding vehicles are highly effective, but many programs are very, very industry selective, rather than focusing on potentially cross-sector opportunities with the most widespread impact. In the examples I gave, we were able to repurpose a natural language processing engine, albeit we had to do quite a significant amount of retraining, but nevertheless the core frameworks were able to take and go from incoming email triage complaining about kettles to being able to use it in NHS referral triage. That's a pretty strong endorsement of the cross-industry capabilities we would like to build. At Deloitte and in my team, we very consciously created a cross-sector team to go after the space, to allow us to leverage the opportunities between these different areas. And we believe research funding programs should continue or should try and reflect this trend wherever possible. And the final recommendation we'd make is that post-Brexit, the UK must continue to be a favourable business environment. The UK must be internationally recognised as a great place to build businesses at the centre of European and world technology and trade. Critical to AI advancement, in particular, will be the flow of data, people, ideas and services amongst our partners, both in Europe and worldwide. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. I really just wanted to follow up by, you've got some pretty punchy suggestions there, basically, derived from a lot of experience and a feeling that, particularly on the bridge front, that business really isn't stepping up to the plate or doesn't really understand the opportunities that are available there. And you've made your point, about Canada perhaps having a rather better set of policies in place. I mean, do you get the impression that this government in particular is listening to what you have to say?
It's difficult to say whether the government in particular is listening. I think I pick on the earlier point you made to some extent, which is, it is a shared responsibility. To give you an example, as a firm like ours, we have to be a place that's an exciting place to work for people with these backgrounds and make us an attractive destination for people to do this. We, as a firm, do invest in lots of what we call bridging activities and also pre-university training to try and help this. Yep. And I certainly think there's a lot of space there to help give people the understanding and the belief that they can work in this space with a range of different skills backgrounds. As I say, I have a PhD myself, not in the space, and in a way I'm kind of the exemplar. My background actually is cancer research. I got into this area through health analytics and working in healthcare AI. I now lead a cross-sector team, but I have a lot of what I might call jobbing data scientists who do the tough stuff, and finding ways to really get a very wide diversity of people into that sort of space and excited by it, I think, is the opportunity.
I mean, you've made a big, you put a big emphasis on this cross-sectoral aspect of it. I mean, in a sense, probably because of your own background in a way, you can see how you can translate across into different sectors. Have you got the skills? Are the skills there, or do you find that is one of the other frustrations?
The skills are there. It's an interesting analysis of what makes a really, really good data scientist, and there's lots of versions of this. But a good one, and I don't know who originally coined it, but it certainly wasn't me, is a great data scientist has the sort of mathematics and the computational science and statistical background to work in the space. They're good hackers, and when we say hackers, we don't mean hackers in the negative way, but we mean people who can really think around problems, who can pull things together in different ways and make stuff work rather than seek perfection. And lastly, they're great business consultants. They understand the commercial outcome. They understand the business reason why they're doing what they do. Those sort of, not unicorn, but relatively rare individuals are the people who, in our organisation, have the most impact, because they're the people we can put on quite thorny, complicated problems where the data's often not perfect, where there's no immediate route through to actually make it really work. So they're the guys we look for. And I think a lot of that is taught in universities, and I think there's a lot of people coming out of that with the skills. I think we've got to find more effective ways to bridge those data science skills with the commercial skills and the desire to understand the commercial side as well as the sort of purer data science side, perhaps.
Very important message there. Yeah, thank you. Right, and now on to Andrew Burgess, who's an author of the Executive Guide for AI. He's a management consultant as well as being an author and a speaker with over 25 years' experience. He's considered an authority on innovative and disruptive technologies, including AI and robotic process automation. He's a former CTO who has run sourcing advisory firms and built automation practices, and now advises senior executives on creating value from AI. So it's a perfect match between the two of you, I'm sure.
There's some similarities in what we're going to talk about, actually, yes. So he said I'm a strategic advisor on artificial intelligence, which means I help organisations and enterprises develop their AI strategies and how they can best exploit these technologies. I also advise technology companies on how to embed AI into their service offerings as well. And these companies range from startups to Big Four consultancies as well, so the full range. And as I said, I'm also author of the the Executive Guide to Artificial Intelligence. The reason I explain all this, I think, is because the work that I'm doing is really at the coalface of AI. It's about how businesses are using AI today. And so, really, for me, AI is a technology that can potentially benefit everybody. With regard to trade, therefore, it should be ideally available. It should be easily available and without restrictions. But just as AI can potentially wreak massive damage at scale, we know this is subject to many constraints, whether they be around the specialist knowledge required, the issues around data flows across borders, or the rights to data privacy for the users of AI. So my vision to ease these constraints is for a democratized AI. This is where AI is being used every day by citizens, consumers, and businesses in an open and transparent way, where access to the knowledge to create AI is easily available, where AI has moved beyond the hype and fear bubble and is focused on delivering real value to society rather than click-throughs on adverts. Crucially, an AI that's being implemented and used by the people will be for the good of the people, with the necessary controls and balances inherently built in. And in my work, I see some great things being done by technology companies to democratize AI. For example, much of the legwork of data scientists can now be done on data science platforms, in effect using AI to find the best AI algorithms. But it's still a long way from where I think we need to be. I know it's easier and better to get data scientists from Estonia or from Portugal than it is from the UK. I know that 99% of the business people I speak to have no real idea of what AI is and how it can help their businesses. And through no fault of their own, these people get distracted and confused by the headline stories of the big AI companies touting alleged successes. And I firmly believe that it's a fool's task to try and create global standards for AI, particularly around ethics and trade. There are two huge hurdles to overcome. The first is the diverse nature of AI technology, trying to find common codes where they either have to be too compromised and diluted or so complex as to be incomprehensible. The other main challenge is the different cultural approaches to privacy and ethics across the globe, and we can see this today between China and the US, and even between the US and Europe. So we need to look at, for answers, at the metaphorical coal face. And I know from my work with a wide range of businesses, if the data is there, then there will be value that can be drawn from AI, whether this is to improve process efficiencies, to increase customer service levels, or to transform the whole business. So it's clear to me that the value from AI is orders of magnitude greater than any other automation technology, but this value doesn't have to come from the Googles or Microsofts or be implemented by the big four consultancies. AI, in my mind, will work best if it's a grassroots movement. It will find its champions, advocates, and sponsors in everyday business and everyday lives. And this is the democratization of AI that I think will unlock its value. So how should we and parliamentarians try to democratize AI? So in the world I'm describing, AI will succeed as a business tool only where it can be used easily and effectively. For the UK to become a go-to source of AI capability and a central hub of trade in AI, then we really need to focus on the people, both the users and the creators of technology. We need business people who understand the capabilities and value of AI. We need data scientists and developers that can build it. In the APPG's report last year, there were some great recommendations on how to do this, and they should be pursued. But fundamentally, we need to make AI less sexy and less scary for people. Once AI can be seen as a tool, once it has been democratized, then we will see the real value flow. So how do we make sure these tools are available to as many people as possible? Open source is one answer, and here the big tech firms are providing many of their development tools as free of charge. But of course, a lot of this is just a hook to become the de facto standard. We need to think carefully about the relative roles of big AI versus small AI. And there is so much energy and talent outside of these big firms that it should be encouraged and promoted. A democratized AI economy will rely much more on self-regulation and domestic ethical codes. We need to give small firms the voice and the breathing space to flourish in this environment. So this leaves government's chief role, in my view, in boosting trade in AI to supporting the necessary education and skills for the people, whether this is delivered on the job or much earlier in the formal education process. This point about embedding AI into the standard curriculum cannot be emphasised enough. As everyone is aware, transforming education, of course, is not an overnight change, but as Napoleon is reputed to have said, the best time to plant a tree is 25 years ago, the second best time is now. Thank you.
Thank you. Really just wanted to pursue the democratisation point because, in a sense, you talked about various different elements, but of course, you know, one of the key underlying aspects, you didn't actually use the phrase public trust, but you know that must underlie that if it's going to be fully democratised, you need to have that trust. And you just touched on ethics and privacy. I mean, what is the relationship between those aspects?
I think one leads to the other. So if you compare it to China or one of the other countries where they have kind of different views, should we say, I think the way that the trust is built up is through the openness and transparency of AI. So I think the role of the UK here is to be that arbiter of trust and openness, and I think that's the way to build the trust with AI.
Do you think self-regulation is enough? Because that's the phrase you used again.
To a point, I think as an approach, I think that's the way forward. I think some of the big questions need to be framed in terms of the right of individuals to privacy of data. I think that needs to be paramount. But beyond that, then I think that's where the self-regulation can
because you're concerned about the ability of the smaller, the SMEs, if you like, the startups to operate. Absolutely,
yes. Yeah. I think that's where the energy is. I think particularly in the UK, for those sorts of businesses, there's so much happening in that marketplace that it just needs to have the voice and the space to.
And that's where the debate is all about, really, in many ways. What stifles innovation, what doesn't, what's necessary to underpin innovation, and so on. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. And now on to Anna Dingley, and thank you very much. I know you're a slightly late entrant to the ball, Anna, but that's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Who's Executive Director, International Business for SparkCognition. That in itself is a great name. Anna is leading SparkCognition's AI business in the UK and across Europe as Executive Director International Business, fluent in Japanese, with extensive cross-sector experience in industry, government and finance in the UK, Japan and the US. She's excited to be working at the forefront of the AI and machine learning sector as it continues to influence and shape our world. Anna.
Thank you very much. And yes, thank you. It's also nice to be last to have heard the other speakers first. And I think actually some of the comments I'm going to make will echo some of it and actually enforce, I think, some of those messages, particularly about the cross-sector aspects of AI and really how we've got to focus on delivering value. I think actually your comment there, Andrew, at the end about it's the energy that comes from some of the smaller companies. I hope that maybe I can give that perspective today, because we're a growing firm. I'm actually SparkCognition's based in Austin in Texas, and we've got about 200 people now, but I'd say 2 years ago we were just about 40. So we're growing very, very fast, and as I mentioned, we're very excited to try and actually be applying the AI technologies across a whole range of different, with a range of clients. I'm going to canter through your questions that you kindly reminded of us at the beginning, actually, so I'll be quite focused on them and give a flavour really for how we're approaching these and the view that we've seen. So you say how's AI changing the trade, both sort of internationally and nationally? And I was looking at, well, why are our clients, why are companies looking at AI in the first place? So I think there's the sort of efficiency angle. There's a shrinking pool of experienced labour that people are seeing. There's a lot of the hype of AI that you mentioned earlier. We're seeing pressure from both internal and external stakeholders for companies that they have to try and get this competitive edge by using AI. And I think that's is changing the trade then, both nationally. We're seeing companies actually have to look more openly internationally to see where they can find the right solutions to this, or nationally they're looking for more for skills really from the local talent. It reminded me, though, I was thinking of I was on a holiday it was over 10 years ago now, it's actually 2007. I was on a camel in a desert in India. And I remember the guide who, used to have a tourism guide who was your guide. But this guy was on a mobile phone developing his whole business from a whole range of different types of areas. And I think the mobile phone in that area, as we probably, as you know, in India and Africa and some of these more faster developing economies, where people were embracing this type of new technology and what it could do. And I think at SparkCognition as well, as we're growing internationally, we're seeing a lot of development and a lot of keen, faster adoption from places in Latin America, for example, where some of the more developed economies are following much more staged ways to test exactly what we're doing with others or how they could do it internally. So I think this sort of faster pace we're seeing, but we're also seeing maybe faster adoption from some of the different economies that are more nimble really and haven't got such structures in place. On another point really about the sort of international border side and the defence and national security, I think there are a few more blurred lines. People recognise it's such a powerful technology and sometimes can be used. They don't want their own technology to be used in a different way. So I see with that, there are various changes within the sort of international borders of how AI is being used. I think as well it's interesting to look at the business models, and your question there is very, very pointed. How are the business models changing? And we probably see a lot in the consumer space and in our own lives how suddenly we're having to have a subscription to everything rather than just having to buy one product 10 years ago and it would last a long time. I think certainly in business as well we're seeing that that most things are software as a service rather than a package. It's a much more of a licensing issue that we're having to negotiate rather than just selling one-off product, a sort of commodity product. We're seeing a lot more collaboration for strategic partnerships. Co-opetition, as our CTO mentioned, who's in the audience, but I think so co-opetition, we're seeing a lot more companies are realising that they're going to have to collaborate more with people who used to just be their competitor, but in order to sort of grab this market share. I think it's also quite interesting, there's an observation really about when we're talking to clients that I think is also affecting the business models, but who is the decision maker, or who is actually the enthusiastic part within these companies that's wanting to embrace AI products? It could be an R&D division. Traditionally it would be R&D that maybe have fed through to other teams. Sometimes now it's coming from an operational budget, if it's something that's predictive maintenance type of use of AI. It could be a marketing team that's if they're deriving a new revenue, and that's a revenue stream, and that's having a big impact on a business model. In Japan, often I've seen it comes from, say, the office of the CEO, where they've decided it's such a key element to their sort of strategic team's understanding. So I think there's quite a range of how these business models are being changed across different companies, and it's exciting to watch that. And you were talking, again, at one of the questions here, sort of the move from e-commerce to AI commerce. And when we think, so what was e-commerce is the move from the bricks and mortar really to then a virtual shopping type of idea. And now we're saying, well, so what is then the next step from that? And I think it's much more intelligent targeting, really, of how the retail, as an example, is working, moving a lot more from the globalization side of globalization for economies of scale, but then this localization and personalization, more relevant goods and services that are targeted to consumers and companies alike. So I think this AI commerce is really facilitating that level of personalization and predictive supply chains, allowing things to be more accurate. And actually as well, bringing back then this accountability and traceability aspect of trade. Technology like blockchain as well, enabling that tracking the supply chain and people being able to understand exactly where things are coming from. So it's sort of that extra level of dare I say the word insight, is overused as well, but I think the AI commerce is that sort of next step really, which is quite interesting. And then your final point to address, you said the changes to UK taxing frameworks. I think from a small company's point of view, we certainly understand that these frameworks need to be there, but it's building frameworks that can adapt to change, because I think, as we've all been mentioning, this world is changing so fast. You don't want to I guess kill the goose that lays the golden egg by stifling the innovation and technology so much. We need consistent messaging, which I think actually the British government is good at saying we're open to business. I must say, actually, though, that all of the companies where we operate, everybody is saying the same. A lot of companies, certainly in America, in Japan, in Dubai, in Latin America, where we've got offices, most of these countries also believe that they are leading the AI revolution. And I think it's quite interesting to compare then sort of which aspects are people leading. But so I think, the less, as I mentioned, really one of my early points about the less developed economies moving faster. I think it's, the established companies, we mustn't put inadvertent roadblocks in our own way to damage our growth in those prospects. But so that's the view from a small growing AI company, and we feel like we're at the coalface as well, trying to help companies adopt these, and then we also adapting the new, sort of expanding extending the science of AI.
Anna, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to just ask you a question which the others may want to sort of enter into as well. You're very clear, very upbeat really about the potential there, but you are also really, I think, underlying it, there was you were saying sort of similar things to Matthew, I think, in a way that the if you like, the pace of adaptation, and actually the same as Andrew in some respects, the pace of adaptation and the pace of adoption, if you like, is not really fast enough. Is that? What is that, you think? Is it because people are risk averse in this country? Because you're making a contrast to some degree with other countries, with the fact that, and I think the point's been made, Mike made it earlier, that we have this great research output, if you like, but actually the adoption of AI and some of that, and commercialisation perhaps of some of that research, is not as fast as it should be compared to other countries. So is that a fair statement? And how do you get over that kind of risk-averse approach?
I think
apart from you going to give them a pep talk.
We may as well try and be enthusiastic about it. It is an optimistic time. I think it depends a lot on the company that you're talking to, and then which person within that company. A quick way to allay some of those fears and try and help people not be quite so risk averse is to do quick proofs of concepts, to identify and clearly outline then what are they trying to achieve. I said at the initial point, why do companies even think about taking on these projects? They often do have a problem. And if you can then, or they need to become more efficient, or they've had a bad accident that they want to make sure they can stop it happening again by analysing some of the data that's coming through. So I think, or they haven't got as many staff who are the experts in that particular engineering. So I think a company has got a problem that they're trying to solve. If we can help them solve it and demonstrate how AI can improve their business and help them become more efficient more quickly, then that helps them allay some of their fears, I think. But it does depend on each company's approvals process, and that comes down to, again, where the budget is. If it's somebody who's got some budget within themselves, within their group, and they can quickly do a project, you can prove them that it's worth it, then that's a quicker way to get there rather than endless research.
Yeah. Mike, you have a bird's eye view of this. Does any of this resonate with you, or are you unalloyedly enthusiastic and everybody's moving forward at a great pace?
I think I'm balanced, I'm not unalloyed. I think I would believe that scalability is important for the UK, and I think, as per Matthew's point, making sure that scalability works in both a single sector and in a cross-sector way is key. And I think the UK shouldn't be shy, given the size of our economy relative to other economies, shouldn't be shy of actually helping that along. I think we're very good at incubating and accelerating, but I'm not so sure we're so good at scaling yet. And I think more emphasis should be put on scaling, and that's partly why I pointed to the access to data issue. If the access to data is inhibited, then I think, frankly, the scalability will be tough. We've also got another handbrake, which we need to consider, not just the issue of skills, but also are we at capacity now? Already we're seeing a lot of inward investment to the UK around AI right now, and that's because of some of the things that we've already done, partly because of the good work of APPG and Wendy Hall and so on. But we need to just think about what capacity do we really have and find ways of increasing that capacity with more of the data scientists that Matthew had quite clearly described. But overall, I'm very optimistic. I think we can do this. We've got the skills. We've basically got the education. I think we need to find ways of opening up the opportunities.
Do you think it's the scalability, Matthew, or do you think are there other factors at work?
We certainly see risk concerns in our client base, as we discussed, and we solve those often with a proof of concept based approach. And the projects I described started off life as very small, compartmentalised, safe pieces of work, signal detection, before we scaled. I do think, though, the point that Mike has made around data is a critical one with scaling, at least if we think about some of the real scale, and a good case in point here would be healthcare data sets. The reality is there is
other real problems about access to data sets. Certainly in our select committee, we were worried about the dangers of monopolisation of some of the data sets.
I think there's a problem in many directions. to work through them in turn. I mean, within organisations, first of all, just stepping away from healthcare, but in general, there is understandably caution around the use of data and how data is used, and ensuring the security of data is paramount, while at the same time not putting handbrakes on how you might build new tools is key. And that's important, because one of the things, for example, that can slow AI adoption at scale is that a lot of AI technology is perceived, whether it is true or not, to need sort of cloud infrastructure to all be sent to America before we can do anything with it. And that puts people off, quite understandably. If you're going to start processing your customers' very sensitive complaints data, you do not want to be sending that into cloud infrastructure you do not control. And one of the things we spend a lot of time doing is reassuring clients, actually, you can do a lot more in your own infrastructure. You can do a lot more on-premise than you realise. But to Adam's point, there is a little bit of Andrew's point, there is a little bit of a perception that you have to be working with a huge tech company and spending millions of dollars every hour to be able to get out the starting bricks. So reassuring around the risk profile, I think, is quite important. But to directly tackle the data point in a healthcare context, there is a danger that lots of individual healthcare organisations try and solve things that perhaps if they were able to share data more effectively, they could solve at scale. I think is a real and present concern in our infrastructure, and I'm sure is one that, as Mike's already alluded to, is said often and we haven't yet solved. And to your point, it wouldn't be great if we could share data with the US in this context. Wouldn't it be great if we could share data with ourselves in this context? Would also be very good.
Thank you. And Andrew, I mean, is data the issue, do you think? Or do you think there are broader, is it scalability that we were talking about earlier?
Data is one issue, but a lot of firms will have their own data. And, I've worked with companies who have data coming out of their ears and they have no idea what to do with it. So AI is kind of the answer that can unlock that data for them. I think one of the biggest problems is this idea that because there's so much hype around AI at the moment, but people don't believe that AI is for them. They think it's for the big companies, and it's, why would it relate to me? And it's, as I said before, if the companies you go into, if the data is there and it's available, there will be value. And even the smallest businesses, if they've got enough data, there's value that you can extract from AI, and they're really quite surprised by that. And the other thing they're quite surprised is that it doesn't cost millions of pounds to do this, and you can do something relatively quickly and relatively cheaply, at least on a proof of concept point of view, before you move on. There is, though, a challenge, I think, with scalability in that, and we found this with robotic process automation as well, lots of people doing lots of pilots and proof of concepts and then not moving into that next stage, and there's almost this Bermuda Triangle that people get sucked into, and they don't come out the other side in terms of, right, how do we industrialise this? How do we make this productionise it for our business?
Well, now, what's the issue there? Is it leadership championing? Is it risk aversion? Or what?
A lot of those things, I think, particularly now, you get, particularly the business I work in, there's usually one champion within the business that's pushing AI, and they can see the value and they want to go forward with it. But to take it to that next stage, then you've got to get the full buy-in from every stakeholder within that business. And it's generally the risk or fear or lack of understanding, or all three, that stop people kind of putting their hearts behind it.
That's interesting. And it's also that fit, to add to that, perhaps the change that they've got to go through. So there's the lack of understanding the fit. But if they've already got a system in place, it's quite a big project to actually change that. And maybe that's why we're seeing more rapid adoption from companies that haven't actually got a system in place yet, and they've decided to go straight for something like an AI type based solution.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Well, the panel have laid the ground extremely well, and I'm going to throw it open, and we're going to take 3 questions, and then the panel can answer any of them or none of them as they choose. So beware. And we'll kick off with one question over there, one there, and then one there, and then we'll come around the room. So 1, 2, 3. Yes, please.
Hi, my name's Tom Pickler. I'm a company turnaround expert, and one of the things I realised is the reason why businesses get into trouble is because the actions and the challenges are misaligned. The challenge with AI is well, there's a few challenges with AI. It's the difficulty in speaking up against the mantra. Extraordinarily difficult. Some of the statements to be made in terms of inevitability distract activity from the real challenge. this also, during the process, is, as us as human beings, is undermining our ability to cope. So the things that human beings can't cope with is uncertainty, which AI drives, speed, which is exponential in the case of AI, and in terms of, there's a big deal on mental wellness and employee engagement. So there's this huge counter-intuitive thing. The other concern is at a macro level. If you look at I'm a macro level guy because I want to turn around businesses, I've turned around retailers using technology, so I'm a fellow who's invented engineering as well. My concern is if you look at this at macro level, what you see is diminishing differentiation because you're commoditising a lot of the front-end activity, with a few exceptions like Starling Bank and others who are quite clever at automating the back-end technology. But you see also the reduction in the ability to keep in control of this and undermining governments as well. So the rise of the big nationals, the Googles of this world, could very easily undermine the role of governments and our ability to stay in control of it. And the longer this process goes on, my observations are, and people have noticed this in terms of the polarisation of thinking in the UK around Brexit and Trump and the rest of it. There isn't much dialogue going on between the two. And so the challenge, the question really is, I'm not convinced what's happening at macro level, whether or not the indicators are that positive, and also how do we keep them.
I think you've given them quite enough to think about existentially. That's all I can say. But thank you very much, and I'll go on to the next question, which I think was at the side. Yes, there we are, just there.
I'm Roberto Decimo from BA Systems. The UK's always been at the forefront of establishing global standards for emerging technologies, and there's this great opportunity now for the UK to punch above its weight and influence global AI standards for the benefit of international trade. So the question is, what can government do to help UK industry and academia grow potentially a dominant position in these global AI standards, especially at the boring end, what I'll call the test, evaluation and certification of AI systems and solutions? Boring but potentially lucrative.
Very important, thank you.
Charles Hughes. I'd like to mention a programme which touches on many of the issues raised by our four excellent panellists. I'm a member of the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists, a City of London livery company, and our charity announced at the beginning of this year that we would make a significant donation to a charity who could come up with a programme to make exciting and innovative use of IT. We announced the results after significant due diligence and many applications. We announced the results 10 days ago. We are going to support two charities. The first is Missing People, a charity that works with those who have gone missing, who want to make contact, and particularly supports those who are affected. They work with the NSPCC and with the Children's Commissioner, and their aim is to write an AI chatbot which will integrate with their different websites, applications to triage the requests that they get. And last year they handled over 90,000 requests and are struggling, indeed cannot cope with the influx that they are seeing. The second is a charity called CALM, Campaign Against Living Miserably, which operates in the area of suicide. It campaigns for all the activities and links to suicide. It works a helpline, and it, last month alone, reckons there were 1,000 approaches to it that it could not respond to, even though the number of volunteers is increasing. So they have a project to write an AI chatbot to triage all the requests that they get through the web, messaging and elsewhere. As you can appreciate, this is an application which has significant life or death consequences. It could and should be very effective, and it's got keen ethical implications. So we have made three significant announcements. The first is that we are going to donate £300,000 to Missing People. Secondly, we're going to donate £300,000 to CALM. And thirdly, we are going to set up an AI learning exchange which will garner knowledge and information about the use of AI in the charity sector. We hope it will forge links with industry, with commerce, and it will act as a disseminator of the information. It will clearly tie in with many of the themes that have been mentioned: scalability, cross-sector, democratisation, ethics, practical innovation, risk, and so on. And I'm asking, how can industry and commerce help us with knowledge and support of the AI learning exchange?
Thank you very much. Very cunningly inserted into our proceedings. And I'm going to ask for a fourth question, if I may. I'm trying to get a bit of gender balance here, but I'm finding it a little bit awkward. Any? No, I don't think I'm going to succeed. Oh, yes, lady over there.
Well, I just wondered whether the panel might expand on things about the regulatory framework and keeping it as much as possible to try and drive innovation, and I get that, but actually, what's the view of actually this is a really important, there's some really important ethical and trust issues that we're all going to be debating in years to come. So it just strikes me that we can't just look at the innovation angle, because we might end up a bit far down the path and suddenly we're thinking, oh my God, we haven't really understood this. And I agree with one of the points I think made over there, that actually I think Britain has got a history of being able to set good standards in some of these areas, and so I just wonder, should we be doing more of that? Should we be pushing that agenda?
Fantastic, thank you. And so we had the sort of general background as to why we thought people weren't adopting AI. We had the point about standards in particular, and we had that very important point about the ethical implications. So take your choice. Mike.
Well, let's go from the top, shall I? I think taking a macro view is very good. I think that's one of the reasons why we're here at APPG. But I think also AI doesn't necessarily sit on its own or in isolation. So as to whether we do something at the core versus a purpose approach, as to whether we address the speed or whether we do back end versus front end or whatever, I think all of it needs to be looked at. But I think in a systems engineering type way, and I'm also a fellow of the IET, I think some of those systems need to be looked at with all the ingredients, not just the AI element. So in electronics, clearly we've had to think about all the electronics components, but actually today it's much more about systems engineering. So how could we take a systems engineering approach to it? I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that question, because it was almost philosophical, but I would say that AI-based systems should be looked at, not just AI in isolation. And quickly, if I can take the other points, global standards, well, I'm all in favour of that. I've been from the mobile industry, and that's one of the most global standards there is. Equally, the internet is one of the most global standards there is. I think there is a lot of opportunity to look at some of the boring stuff. I think it was described as test and certification. But I think we've got to be very clear on what we're really meaning in this area, because I think AI is still too ill-defined to start to get it well-defined. But I think we need to be on that journey towards standardisation. As a former board member of ETSI and a former chairman of the GSM Association, I'm all in tune with the need to do it, but I think it needs a bit of fine-tuning first before we can start on that journey to standardisation. City of London Charities, great that you're doing the work. I would highlight the AI incubator that's just been announced in Edinburgh between the University of Edinburgh and Telefonica and others, Cisco and others. And I think there may be some resource there that you might want to leverage. There is also some good facilities in London called the Alan Turing Centre and places like that. You might want to leverage some of those. I think even if it was an advert today, sir, you might want to pick up on some of those resources that are available to you. And lastly, on the regulatory framework, if I may complete there, I think there is more to be done in that area, but I think APPG's got a good track record already in making good suggestions. I think it could do a bit more in the link to ethics. Industry, I don't think, understands ethics very well, and I don't want that to sound rude, but which ethic do you mean? Can we be very clear on how ethics links to data? what do we mean by ethics? I think that there's probably some room for standardization in that area as well before we get into detailed regulation or even legislation. So I think there's room for more APPG work built on the work you've already done.
I think you've set a very interesting question for your fellow panellists as well. And so while you're about it, Anna, as well as those questions, you might just touch on an answer to Mike's question there.
Yes, well, it's an interesting point, isn't it? And as somebody said earlier as well, that actually the views are becoming quite polarised. So it's one of these issues where you're not going to find an answer that's going to keep everybody happy all of the time. Yep. There's a few points I've got to make, as very wide-ranging questions there, but I think... So you mentioned the first question, Tom, about the challenge of AI, and that's bringing what humans don't like is the uncertainty and the speed. I think actually AI can be there to provide a bit of certainty. It can provide some background information or some explainable AI about why things are happening in a company. And so I think maybe companies can turn that on its head and use the evidence that the AI is providing to provide that certainty. Certainly, BAE Systems, we would agree that the global standard is very important. We're working a lot with the US military to help them identify some different areas in that. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, like compared to the telecoms industry, it's certainly an important way to go. And if there's anything from a US standpoint we can do to support those activities, we'd help. We'd be interested to be involved. The AI chatbots, I've got another little story, which might make you laugh, but my parents moved house this year, and my dad was endlessly on call lines trying to sort out the electricity bill. The phone battery then stopped, so he had to go onto an AI chatbot. Took another hour, trying to sort out, and he said, sorry, I was on the phone, but my battery died and I had to do this. And his AI chatbot came back saying, we're extremely sorry and send our condolences for your loss. His phone battery, which in the midst of a very stressful move did actually provide a bit of entertainment. So I would say, though, that it's probably you have to be a bit careful with on the serious side of these chatbots. I think that they certainly, I think there's been proof
to the drawing board.
But there is proof, though, isn't there? I think that, don't ask me who gave it, but I'm sure I read it somewhere, that people they don't actually mind interacting with the robot as long as they feel somebody's listening to them. So I think it's certainly an avenue worth exploring, but I think you have to be a bit careful with these assumptions that an AI chatbot may make. And regulatory framework, I guess that's exactly what this body is set up to try and address. I think, again, there might not be one right answer, but I think working with people like the APPG and Big Innovation will help get those right answers to the table.
Andrew, I mean, advising companies on actually how they introduce AI systems in an ethical way, is that part of what you do as well?
Yeah, it's interesting that you don't really come up against these challenges on let's say, at the coalface, because most of the people I work with are, they're decent people and they know what's right. So if they are doing something like, a chatbot for missing persons or for any of those sorts of quite sensitive areas, people will know what's right and what's wrong, and they're not thinking how to scam the system or do things that's just going to make them money at the expense of people. So ethics comes into it, but it's not, I think everyone really understands that. Mm-hmm. And this is where I go back to, the idea, as Mike was saying, the global standards of ethics, but what ethics are we talking about? And the ethics of the UK are very different than the ethics of the US and China and Russia, etc. And trying to globalise that, I think, is you're on a hiding to nothing, to be honest. I think we've got to be very focused. If we are going to have global standards, very focused on what those global standards are going to be doing, and they are going to be the boring stuff, and we're going to have to ignore the things that we just can't tackle.
Standards, the point that was made, those are practical, you think?
Yes, but just the boring ones. I think there are some things you can do globally, but for example, if you say, well, we want to have explainability of algorithms and that as a standard approach, What do we mean by an algorithm? What is that a chatbot, or is that a random forest algorithm? Or there's a huge range of stuff. Is it a formula in Excel? There's a whole range of stuff, and where do you stop in terms of defining these things? So we have to be really careful and focused in terms of what we think global standards are for and what they're not for.
Do you think some of this, Matthew, do you think some of these are barriers, these sort of issues about ethics and standards are barriers to the adoption of AI, or is it for other reasons, really? I mean, when you're advising, do you see them as things that sort of stand in the way? Or for instance, the fact that there may be a different set of ethics in different countries, or people may have a different view of it, depending on where you sit. Is that at all relevant to the adoption, or is it all the points that were made earlier about scalability, data, and so on and so forth?
I think ethics are very relevant. I agree with Andrew. We have ethical frameworks, and we should continue to challenge them and make sure they're fit for purpose in this context. And generally, they're reasonably robust. I think I certainly do not see ethics as a barrier, in the sense that I think we've always sought to be highly ethical, as in all our business activities, in what we do. And if something's unethical in another area, it will still be unethical in AI, frankly. I think the point around regulation and standards is a really interesting one. So if we think about the healthcare context, one of the things we're working on very carefully at the moment is how do we address the regulatory challenges of using data science in a regulatory context, in a triage context, for example, where I stress, we are still working through that in pilot mode, and working closely with sovereign agencies such as the Medical Health Regulatory Authority to understand how the regulations can be adopted and used in this context. And
in a sense, you're talking about regulation in an enabling way, aren't you?
Correct. And that's exactly right, because back to Mike's point, the key there then is therefore what are the standards we're meeting, what's the validation we take, what's the validation protocol we use to make sure that we can, as far as possible, assure the performance of a technology to the desired specification. And that's actually the way I would position it. I think when done appropriately, both the ethic and regulatory framework should be enhancing adoption and should help us, because they guide us in how to actually do this in a way that actually is sustainable and scalable in a way that meets the needs of stakeholders. And that's the way we view it.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go round the room again. I've got Birgitta first, and then I think you had your hand up earlier.
I was going to ask about international standards. I think my question's been well covered.
Yeah, good. Okay, and then another one. And then, we'll take you. Yeah, okay. Birgitta.
So my question is related to market concentration, and I wonder whether the panel could comment on that, and particularly on Mike Short. So we are talking about the tech giants right now, and we are in a situation in the United States now, although that we see, and it's the same trend starting here in Europe, or it's very much in Europe, that although we see startups and incubators and accelerators everywhere, they're more visible, the tech giants are actually increasing in market share and crowding out the smaller ones. And they do that in several ways. They can buy up each other, their mergers and acquisitions, and they do what is now often called kill in the crypt. So basically they're buying up small companies before they're actually even teenagers. And a lot of this, so if you take the monopolies and mergers, my question is, if you take monopolies and mergers commissions and these agents, they're looking at the market share in terms of product markets, but the strength is often in data markets or IP or platform ownership. So what should be done about these tech giants? What is the best way to regulate them, and how can we create more competition, or should anything be done?
Great, thanks, Birgitta. And then we had a second one somewhere, I think. Yeah, who raised? Yes, you.
Yes, thanks for your presentations there, and I want to bring up the accountability in trade and taxes. One of the problems is that GDP is no longer so useful for locating where added value is. For example, if a British consumer uses an American website and sees an American ad, the American company that provides the ad will pay money to the American website owner. But part of that added value should be counted as British. How much is difficult to establish. This is somewhat connected with a lot of people I know who are trying to figure out what people really want, not just how much can you get them to click on something. If you can get that started, we can see how much consumers have in added value from interactions, and this would give an estimate for things like international trade, and you can sort of start maybe taxing that or dividing the added value. And so the question is there any sort of preparations for this kind of scenario?
Wow. Right, okay. Well, we'll see what our panel will make of that one. And then I've got one over there, and I will take a fourth. So, gentleman there. No, sorry, that one there. That's the one I was pointing at.
Is bad data driven by bad algorithm or bad AI driven by bad algorithm or bad data?
8 definitions, and then gentleman there.
Yeah. Okay. Alex Housley from Selden. We talk a lot about the kind of macro view and the decision makers and the governance, and also about data scientists and people, writing algorithms, training models. But one of the big bottlenecks to actually putting models into production is, I suppose, expanding on Matthew's point, is one of the boring issues, and it's around DevOps and infrastructure engineering, and these are really key skills that are actually required to operationalize, productionize machine learning. So it would be just good to get a little bit more of an expansion on what you're seeing as you've been working on projects, how much of a blocker this is, and how important it is to emphasize this as a skill set that is complementary to data science, but a completely different set of skills to a data scientist.
Thank you. And then I will take the fifth, since you were so insistent. Short question, I hope. Looks like you've got something on there.
Very short.
Right.
Well, of course, from Ken's side, how can Britain utilise AI to boost international trade post-Brexit?
Very good. Okay, I think it's really a choix. So as you choose to answer, we'll start, I think, at your end, Matthew.
So maybe I'll come in on the DevOps, and that's a world I live in daily, or my teams live in. So a couple of observations there. Firstly, you are absolutely on the money. We have been very effective at building fantastic data models, and it's been quite a trial, frankly, to get them into production and to get them integrated. We use a variety of tools to integrate, but what we've learned is there is typically a skills gap there where the client company often doesn't have a team that actually quite knows how to do this. And we didn't historically have a team who quite knew how to do this because we were a bunch of data scientists. Luckily, we've now got more DevOps people and more of the other skills as well, so data engineering and the rest of it. So really, the way we've addressed that is actually to upskill our team outside of just the core AI piece, because we've learned that actually to get our technologies into production, we've had to bring a broader set of technology capability to the table. Which is interesting because sometimes people are quite welcoming of that. Other times people are less welcoming because they think they can do it, or they have the skills in-house. And other times we get into that conversation we touched on earlier, which is around concerns around the security of data, and the business wants something, but the IT department may want something quite different. So it's a very well-observed point. The way we've dealt with it is actually to increase the skills base of the teams, and actually come in with a proposition which is bigger and broader, I would say, than just actually the core data science, to I think where you're going, to really make this stuff work. It isn't just data science. It's about integration and making it work in the real world, as opposed to theoretically.
Is that the one you really want to answer? What about the tech giants and the competition in data?
Well, let me sort of come at it from a slightly different point of view. So I'd like to speak up in defence of ecosystem. So I'm very proud of what we do and how we work with a broad ecosystem. And if I look at how we do chatbots, which are a perennial favourite, and we've talked about, we work very closely with small to medium enterprises to build and deploy those. Those in turn, by the way, are often built on componentry that is supplied by the tech giants. So we have a real ecosystem approach to how we actually build and deploy these technologies. So they are a set of our expertise, and we have people who can build great dialogue flows and do the rest of it. We then have small companies we partner with who build fantastic, what we call orchestration frameworks and additional bespoke technologies around it. And they in turn use bits of Google tech or bits of IBM tech or bits of Microsoft tech to do some of the underpinnings as well. So yes, there are the big tech players, and there is a legitimate discussion there, but I certainly think there is a thriving ecosystem in this space, and the UK has a terrific set of small companies. We partner with them very closely. We have made a conscious choice in certain areas not to build certain technologies because there are so many great small players in the space that frankly we'd be nuts to. We just partner with these guys. I think the real ask is to make sure that collectively, as if you like, big business, which I suppose we are, and government, we find a good way to make sure we sustain and continue to grow that ecosystem.
And aren't you the guys that can work out the taxation treatment of
I am very, very happy. I'm very happy to say I come from the consulting side of our business.
So you're not going to commit to some
the tax is definitely not my bag.
Great.
Yes, just to pick on that point, I think the ecosystem is definitely the way forward. It does share some of the opportunities to the smaller businesses. I think what's still missing is that share of voice from the small businesses upwards. So the people that are getting all the headlines, the people that have the marketing budgets are the big companies. And to answer the fifth question about post-Brexit and how we boost trade, I think it's giving the voice to those smaller businesses, I think is really the way forward, and not necessarily being drowned out by those bigger companies. So I'd just like to pick up on...
Are you optimistic about that?
I'm not optimistic about a post-Brexit world generally, but I think if... You know, there's a societal challenge with...
Mike's here to solve all these problems.
Yes. There's a societal challenge with big tech and inequality anyway, and that, you know, that's a systemic risk that the country has to face by giving the voice to the smaller companies and the consumers and the smaller businesses, I think, is the way forward. There was a very short question about whether bad AI was bad algorithms or bad data. As a consultant, I'd like to say it depends. But it's rarely the algorithm.
It's quite an expensive answer.
Yeah, that's right. It's rarely the algorithms because there's so much choice. The data is obviously crucial, but I think the thing that really matters is what you're trying to do with the algorithms around the data. Making that choice at the very beginning, what are your objectives, can fundamentally impact what you do and how you do it. And I think that's the biggest decision that has to happen as you enter into an AI project.
Great. Hannah?
I think it's maybe a little bit easier for me to answer the last one. I mean, from a US company, and I've spent a lot of my career working and living in Japan, I think the world is so much bigger than we shouldn't be quite so focused on it, and I think that's actually becoming the negative distraction. I think there are huge opportunities working with American companies, working in Japan, as I said Latin America, all the different broader regions. So I think there's a big opportunity there, and we shouldn't actually be too depressed and focused on just a smaller region of the world, because the globe is a big place. Interesting point as well about the getting the right skills in place. We've benefited, and I guess UK SMEs do as well, but we work very closely with UT Austin in Texas. We have a lot of researchers who are doing their PhDs, but they come to join us in their final few months or the last couple of years, and they can still publish papers but actually work on problems and understand how the business is putting it together. And I would certainly recommend that as a good way to manage those types of, that sort of transition really from research into applied commercial solutions. Bad AI, bad data. I mean, it depends as well. But I suppose as well that the person that's actually deciding how to implement it has an impact in that. And it's not, people can use a lot of different technology in good or bad ways, and it depends what the user is focused on. The markets, we've benefited a lot from working and partnering with some of these large tech giants. And some of the larger tech giants, not the sort of, are actually having a really hard time. I think they are actually finding it hard to adapt and change. And I think some of their over-promising maybe in marketing has worked against them. But I think, to everybody's point before as well, the ecosystem is a way that I think we have to try and encourage it. And I do see actually a lot of the larger British companies as well, people are setting up their own VC arms and corporate VC to try and work with and actually get this new ideas from some of the SMEs and work with them at the same time, maybe not buying all of them. And I think I'll leave the regulatory questions to the government. But
you don't see that monopolisation of data by big tech being such an issue. I mean, you're more in the Matthew side of things.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing it at the moment as an opportunity. I mean, if we got to a certain stage where it was a problem, then I'd be saying so. But I think at the moment we're seeing it's as I mentioned in one of my opening remarks, the business models are changing, and I think companies are realising they have to collaborate a lot more, and we're benefiting that from a small company. We can say that we're partnered with Google, and we're partnered with Siemens, and we're partnering with Mitsubishi, and that actually helps raise our profile, I think. And so, we've benefited from it.
Great, thank you. And Mike, a resounding response to all this call for government action and Brexit, post-Brexit and so on.
Well, clearly it won't all be done by government. Let's just take each in turn, if I may. I think on the market concentration point, I think it's an international issue. I don't think it's just a UK issue. And I think when you take it from that point of view, I think there are some issues of scale that need to be considered cross-border, not just within the UK. I think ecosystem is a good approach, but I think there needs to be an international lens on that to avoid excessive dominance of platforms or even major players. But I do think the tech giants have a role to play as multipliers of innovation, and we should acknowledge that they continue to have that role. I'm less worried about kill in the crypt, which is, I think, the phrase you use.
In the crib.
In the crib, was it?
In the crib.
Oh,
I heard crypt, but I thought it must be crib.
Crib, yeah.
Okay, kill in the crib. Good point.
It's not as opposed to Dr. Crippen or whatever it was. It's more,
Just on the accounting point, though, I should highlight that because the UK is a strong services economy, it's quite interesting to see that OECD are looking at how you define services, and some of that work will be instrumental in how we can classify taxation longer term. That's important because taxation can't be looked at for UK only on its own. So we need to keep an eye on what happens in the OECD services activity before jumping to any special services or AI type taxation. Bad data, bad algorithm. I would also highlight that when you have bad data, it might be as a result of meshing data from different sources. And actually it might not come from one source as bad data, it might not just be bad algorithm. So it is a big it depends issue, not just from a consultancy angle. There may be lots of inputs as well as outputs. I don't like the term boring issues for DevOps. Most of my life has been involved with engineering, and I don't feel I'm boring. But with regard to DevOps, it's vital that DevOps and infrastructure engineering are treated well in this space, because actually a lot of the data sits on those platforms. And actually, I made the point earlier on, but regulators need to play a bigger role in looking at the bigger data sets in the economy, whether it's Ofcom doing it or Ofgem looking at it or whatever. I think if they did that, they could be encouraging, not the boring issues, but the stimulation of innovation and investment in that area. And I think there's a case to be said that they should be doing more of that to avoid dominance, but to encourage investment and innovation. And lastly, on the AI post-Brexit, I think we would have had an AI sector deal whether or not we were going for Brexit. I don't think AI is a specific Brexit question at all. And I think what we're doing with the AI sector deal is exactly the right thing to do, which is to stimulate demonstration, research, collaboration, cross-sector activity, debates such as these, but also an AI council. We're still talking about it. So let's keep the dialogue going.
Great, Mike, thanks very much indeed. And I was very struck by your point about the regulation could stimulate innovation and so on, which is really, I mean, one of the key things. I mean, in a sense, why would we have the legislation on autonomous vehicles unless it was designed, to provide some certainty to the industry, so to speak? And there will be other examples. I'm going to draw stumps at this point. I'm going to ask Birgitte to tell us when we're next gathering. And thank everybody very much indeed on our panel who've really responded to everything thrown at them of a wide variety. But I think it's provided quite a lot of clarity, actually. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
We'll see you on November the 5th here in Parliament. And also do look out for next week, October 24th, when we are press releasing our big AI report on landscaping the AI in the UK in technologies, companies, investors and trends. And there's a dinner on October 29th, of which you will hear more information from if you've already been in touch.
Great. Thanks very much, Birgitte, and thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thank you.